But thanks for taking the time. I know you must be like crazy swamped and everything, so I appreciate any time that you have. I think the first thing that I want to talk to you about is something that really this film taps into is getting to be a part of a new scene that you've only written about and experienced through other means, and then you go there and you feel profoundly uncool. And I feel like that is such a relatable thing for a lot of people. But I feel like in films, it's often depicted as like this real bumbling, like over the top comedic exercise. But here I feel like you and Barbie through a performance really find this nice tone of maximum discomfort without going crazy with it. So I was wondering what it's like to sort of create that balance of just the right amount of feeling uncool without making it seem really over the top.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I consider myself really uncool and I always feel socially awkward in like all situations. And, there's like a funny tension in, yeah, being like in some ways a weird like cultural authority as like a critic or a journalist, which, I was in my early 20s and like going to, a misshaped DJ set in like, you know, 2007 New York or like, um, interviewing like MIA, backstage at her concert, but also just like feeling the most like acute social anxiety. And I think that's so yeah, I think you're right that there's something about that. And of course, like the majority of that is in your own head, right? It's like an inner monologue that's like repeating. So yeah, you don't want to like hit it too much on the head in terms of like the I guess what was so fun about kind of like depicting that first loft party at Torm Curtain, which is based on like the first time that I ever went to like a loft party at this place that was called Torm Curtain that my friend invited me to. And I did go and I didn't see the people that I knew there at the beginning. And I remember just feeling like so socially anxious and being like, okay, just give yourself tasks. Like if you get a drink, that's like a thing you could do at this party. And that would take like at least a minute and a half and or like go to the bathroom and wash your hands. And I remember doing that and like people were doing cocaine like on a toilet and I was like, I just want to wash my hands. Like and just kind of feeling like I was like in a movie or something. And then I got, invited in and I did develop like a really wonderful group of friends in Montreal that summer. And then you kind of learn sort of like almost like the cast of characters in this new scene. But I think there's like a real truth in like any time that I've move to a new city or a place to like ostensibly reinvent myself, it's like your old self like catches up with you and you kind of realize that like you still have to kind of be yourself like no matter where you go. And so I think that's kind of what the film is maybe talking about. I think there's this sort of for any there's I think a lot of Torontonians harbor this like escapist fantasy of like moving to Montreal and sort of getting to have this more like bohemian, utopic existence where like you live in a city that's like European and has cheaper rents and is full of artists. And it doesn't always kind of work out that way.
We were wondering, what are you writing? Oh, I'm a music critic. Oh, cool.
I just don't understand why you have to move to Montreal. You're not even French. Montreal is the most exciting place for indie rock. I'm feeling rough, I'm feeling wrong in the time of my life. Hi.
Salut.
There's a party tonight. You should come.
I also have social anxiety.
What?
I don't blame you. Being alive is completely insane.
He's the lead singer. He's the worst guy in Montreal.
Yeah. And another thing that's really sort of speaks to me in like at least my experiences as like a younger writer and thinking back to those days is there's something really interesting that Grace is trying to do with this book that she really wants to write. And it's sort of this thing that runs counter to what you're taught as a journalist, which is you kind of have this thing bred out of you where you're told to not make things personal, and then she gets these notes back saying, what's the deal with this? It's not personal enough. And I immediately understood sort of that like deer in headlights look that she has, where it's like, what's not personal enough? And it's such an interesting thing. And I was wondering if that was something you ever dealt with when you were a writer, you were a journalist, that you kind of got this like clash going on in your head of trying to keep things professional or to make them a bit more personal.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because like a part of me is like I think that this is maybe a quote by Chuck Klosterman where he talked about how like all criticism is autobiography, and you can only come at anything from like your own personal like taste, experiences, point of view, blind spots, and I think luckily we're sort of entering a cultural criticism space now, which is unfortunate that it's like basically eroding entirely, where it's not as much dominated by like predominantly like white cis men. Um, but certainly at the time that I was, writing in my like late teens and early 20s, like all of my bosses and mentors and were like men in their 40s. And I guess the film is also trying to address that. I mean, I was trying to write like them. I was trying to like parrot back their tastes, their ideals, like sound like them, look like them. And I think at the time I thought that we were like equals and peers, and then I was like, wait, I'm like the only woman in the room, and I'm like at least 20 years younger than everybody else, and like this kind of like dance and performance that I'm doing is actually like so stressful all the time. And I think I had a pretty clear voice and sort of tastes and assumptions, but also um I think I was a little bit confused. Like I would write a lot about my personal life and tastes and what I was doing, but I hadn't like really experienced anything yet. So it was a lot of me trying to sound like cooler and wiser and like more authoritative than I probably actually was.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing about kind of double standards there that I think about in the context of when Grace asked the question, like, do you think people who date someone in a band want to be the person in the band? And I feel like if you're the only woman in a room full of 40-year-old men, they might also see you as the equivalent of a 40-year-old man in a weird way.
Yes, I think I felt like that. Yeah, it was strange. It was like I'm 20, but I'm a 40-year-old man, and I'm also like a 10-year-old girl at the same time as I try to talk eloquently about a Peru album that I'm pretending to know about, but I've actually never heard.
And there's something interesting about the written word in this that I think you do really well that a lot of people don't, is I feel like whenever you show someone typing on a screen or sending a text message or just writing in a notes app, you actually find a way to make it kind of dynamic and meaningful, whether it's the notes that Grace is taking for her book or the unhinged text messages that Chevy sends that always got a laugh from me. And I was wondering what it was like to try to like take something that a lot of people say is kind of death on screen and make it sort of dynamic and meaningful to the overall plot of the film and the characters and the directions they go in.
That's so incredibly kind. And that was like a barrier, I think, for a long time when people would read the script. They're like, well, there's so many like emails and texts and her writing her book, and that's like screens are death on screen. And like, are you going to do some kind of like cutesy text, treatment where you like see a little graphic pop up
Really
on the
zazz it
side?
up.
Yeah, like kind of Netflix style. And I was like, oh God, maybe, I don't know, or maybe I should try to like eliminate these as much as possible. And then I think as soon as we like tracked down the real like 2011 technology, from the source, like it was inherently cinematic to see like an old Gmail interface or like the Notes app from like a, 2009 era, iPhone, because I just think there's like so much nostalgia even in like the way that those like interfaces used to look like. So yeah, it was kind of like you do want to hold on the screen because like there's a part of your heart that like sort of bubbles up when it's like, oh my God, old Gmail, or like, um an old edition of like Word, or yeah, it's just like it just is inherently interesting, I guess, because we just live on screen so much that like an older screen feels new.
Wrote a list of goals for the summer, and I'm blowing it.
Can I see it? Write a book. Fall in love. Have actual sex.
We should just keep her whatever, kind of professional. Because you're like an important contact in the industry.
How's all this going?
Do you think that girls who date guys in bands want to be a guy in a band?
I loved your article.
I love Maryland.
And one of the things that is written down that I really zoned in on was when Grace is taking notes, and she notes the tendency of Canadians to be very passive aggressive. And that is something that I feel like I have to explain to a lot of people who don't know a lot of Canadians, that I feel like we really are kind of the kings and queens of being passive aggressive. And I feel like this is one of the few times I've ever seen it in a film where someone has actually kind of called it out, and I could feel like it comes through in the film itself too.
Oh yeah, I guess maybe it's because we're like a colony, and I feel like British people are also that way. Yeah, I think she's making notes about Alanis, and she writes like Alanis was aggressive in a passive aggressive country. Yeah, I mean it's funny because I've been living in the States for about a year, and everyone is like, "You're so nice. Canadians are so nice." I'm like, "You don't know the half of it. Wait till like somebody like steps on your foot on the subway and you say sorry, but you don't mean it." Like I would find that when I was directing, people be like, "You have to stop apologizing." I'm like, it's not an apology. It's like it means like 12 different nuanced things.
Oh. And I think it's kind of interesting that it ties into the Alanis thing, especially since All I Really Want plays a big part in this film, and that was always my favorite song off the album. And I feel like it's so fitting for this because it's kind of a song about knowing what you want and not really knowing how to get it and how to go about getting it. And I was wondering if that was a song from the album that you particularly thought a lot about when you were coming up with the film.
I mean, I feel like what was so interesting about the process of making the film, and Alanis has always been in it like from the very beginning of the first draft. Like Jagged Little Pill was like the first album that I ever fell in love with. I heard it in my mom's Windstar when I was 8 years old, and like my brother was in the back seat, and like You Ought to Know came on, and immediately I was like, oh, I'm gonna listen to this like 12,000 times when I get home. And the more drafts I wrote, and the more research I did about Alanis, and the more like I kind of uncovered about the making of that album, the more like incredibly acute like the parallels between her and Grace really were, and sort of how like the journey of that album and all the pressures that Alanis was under at that time when she was about to write it, like it just felt like so much like it mirrored Grace. And when we were doing, my editor and I were doing like the archival research for when she writes about Alanis, and there's that little montage of like old stock footage of Alanis before she kind of made You Ought to Know. There's like literally, we found the shot where like her producer at the time like pats her on the head, and we had just like edited a scene where Jay like did the same thing to Barbie. And it's just like uncanny. So yeah, I think it's like I didn't even like kind of consciously think about what songs sort of like fueled the movie, but it was incredible that like every time we would put like an Alanis song in the movie, like it would just work so well. Like when we made that montage where there's an acoustic version of I think Hand in My Pocket, and then Simone, my editor, just dropped the song down, and then it ended with like I'm poor, but I'm healthy. Yeah. And it's just like, it always worked.
Yeah, seem really comfortable. So how long have you been a shoe salesman?
Too long. I like to treat it like it's an art project, you know? Shoes. So, how's that thing you're talking about?
My book?
Yeah.
It's great. I got a publishing deal. How's the band going, eh? Got any shows coming up?
Yeah, it's good. We have our first EP launch in August. But there's nothing really lined up. It's stupid.
Well, I'm a music critic. I write for Spin sometimes.
Do you write for Pitchfork?
No, not Pitchfork. But I am a big fan of your work. I could, like, interview you sometime.
Yeah, we can do that. Maybe this weekend.
And the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is this is a film about someone from Toronto going to Montreal, much like you did. And you're kind of returning to a similar situation. But what I love about the film is that it never feels like a Toronto film has suddenly been transplanted into Montreal. It is very much a Montreal movie, and that extends to having a lot of local people working on the film alongside you. If you look at the cast and credits, there's so much great talent from the Montreal area that is being utilized behind the scenes. And for you, how important was it to make sure that you surrounded yourselves with a lot of people who could help to really maintain the authentic Montreal experience and not make it seem like someone from Toronto was just coming in to make a movie that takes place in Montreal?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely paramount to like my vision for the film. Like I didn't want to shoot this movie in like Hamilton or Sudbury and like do like 3 days of pickup exteriors in Montreal. Like it had to be authentically Montreal. And I think also the vantage point that like Quebecois collaborators had on the script and in the casting and just every element of it like really was invaluable because there were so many nuances that you don't think about unless you're like really surrounding yourself with that community of people. And two of my producers, Pat Kiley, who's like an Anglo filmmaker from Montreal that's like lived in Montreal his entire life, and then Julie Grulot, who is Quebecois, like their like ideas about the script and instincts like were so invaluable for me, and especially in shaping the Quebecois characters in the script, because I think originally the script she didn't live with a Quebecois roommate, and having more of that perspective on Grace and also just like building the world with more Quebecois actors and people in it just made it so much more interesting and dynamic. So yeah, I think in the movie like there's a lot of really cool interesting musicians and artists that like I was really thrilled to kind of populate, like Magi Merlin, who performs in the film, is like an incredible musician. My friend Shawn Michaels, who has lived there forever and is like a Gaylor winning novelist and music critic, like he has a little cameo in the second Bone Patrol scene. And so yeah, I think it would have been like absolutely irresponsible of me not to like collaborate with as many Quebecois artists as possible. And like Jessica Hart, my production designer, was incredible to work with, like my hair and makeup artist, Leonie Levack and Jess. It was just like they were so great, and it was just really nice to have like a crew that like was like predominantly French speaking. I mean, it kind of felt like we were like living the movie as we were making it.
Chandler, thank you so much for your time, and congrats on having two movies coming out on the same day. That is some absolute baller shit.
Oh my goodness. I didn't plan it. But yeah, it's a crazy turn of fate, and I'm excited to hear what you think about Roommates when it comes out too.
Excited to
On
check it
April
out.
17th.
And this is also April 17th. Thank you so much again. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
great to see you again, Andrew. Hope
Great
you're
to
doing
see you
great.
too, man. Take care. Like what you just saw? Why don't you check out one of these other interviews or reviews? And while you're at it, why don't you like, share, and subscribe, leave a comment, do whatever you can. Thanks again for watching. Take care of yourselves.